In this lecture, you will be introduced to African art, starting with sub-Saharan civilizations. When learning about culture, it is important that you are introduced to perspectives that you have never seen before. So let's begin by discussing 5 misconceptions about Africa. Misconception number 1. Africa is one big thing. Africa is a vast continent of 52 nations comprising more than 1/5 of the world's land mass and many distinct topographical and ecological zones. Throughout the continent, it is estimated that there are well over 1,000 distinct languages in Africa, making it the most linguistically varied of all the continents. Misconception number 2. All Africans live in tribes. The notion of Africa being tribal is European. During colonization in the late 1800s, the tribal label was used to distinguish Africa from the nationalized, urbanized, and civilized Europeans, but it took on a more derogatory meaning. Misconception number 3. Africans didn't build anything. Aside from the common example of Great Zimbabwe, we also have the pyramids in Egypt. When Africans could build, they did. Africa also has urban centers like Lagos, Nigeria. Today, over 680 million people live in Africa. Although some regions remain sparsely inhabited, others are densely populated. The West African nation of Nigeria, for example, has 1/5 of the entire continent's population. About 1/3 of all Africans live in large cities, such as Lagos, Nigeria, the continent's most populous city with 13.5 million people. Other major urban centers in contemporary Africa include Cairo, Egypt, Cape Town, South Africa, and Johannesburg, South Africa. Misconception number 4. Africa had slaves too. However, there was a difference between the slave system in Africa and Europe. Africa did not have a slave-based economy. Slaves were used for small amounts of additional labor. Few African civilizations relied on slaves for most of their labor, and anyone could become a slave regardless of their background. Misconception number 5. Africa is poor. Poverty is a concept that does not translate clearly from culture to culture. Parts of Africa are poor, but for the most part, it is because of colonization. Africa also boasts some of the most ancient artworks ever found anywhere. Unfortunately, most African paintings and sculptures created before 1800 are hard to date and sometimes difficult to interpret. The geography of Africa is made up of deserts, tropical rainforests, grasslands, and mountains. Each will have a different culture and way of life. The Egyptians are going to exploit regions in Africa, especially to the south in Nubia, for their natural resources like their gold reserves. Africa became one of the main trading ports for the Mediterranean Sea. The rise of Islam would spread very rapidly beginning in the Middle East and spread westward in North Africa. Until 1475, it is a dominant cultural force. Attempting to understand the history of Africa is difficult because there is a lack of systematic archaeological research. Our knowledge is only limited to the last 100 years. African cultures also primarily produce works made of wood, which did not survive in great abundance. To better understand what they were like in the past, it is important to look toward people who are still in Africa and practicing these traditions, keeping the cultures alive today. Some of these traditions include honoring ancestors, worshiping nature deities, and elevating rulers to sacred status. These beliefs have given rise to many richly expressive art traditions. The Nok culture is the earliest civilization that provides us a glimpse into the cultural practices of the peoples. They lived by way of agriculture and produced the earliest sub-Saharan sculpture. Let's look at a short video of an example of a mask being carved. Floods are going to bring these terracotta figures to the surface and our attention. The figures were originally full size, or full body. The photo on the left is similar to what will be found today in the area of Nigeria. The pierced pupils, mouth, and ear holes are characteristic of Nok culture and served as air vents, helping to equalize the heating of the hollow clay head during the firing process. The function of the Nok terracottas is unclear. The head and attire give us as an earlier rock art as indication to the decoration and appearance of these people. The triangular designs is specific to the Nok culture. They also are not concerned with naturalistic or realistic representation, but more so abstraction. Several cultures from the area of Nigeria produce important works. In Benin, we have the Great One, who was the creator of all here on earth, who sent Oba, the king, to rule this area. This is still practiced today, where the Oba is still ruling the cities. The Obas also commissioned ivory carvings, like the one represented here of the Queen Mother. This is a small object worn at the hip that the king would wear. The crown was carefully rendered, having jewelry that show us how significant she was. It also is made of Portuguese heads and mudfish. The mudfish were symbols of trade and of the sea god Olokun. The necklace has heads of Portuguese soldiers. Mudfish live near water, and they mediate between water and land, like the Oba god, who mediates between the human and supernatural world. Wealthy cities like Timbuktu and Janneh were centers of Islamic learning. Janneh also was a major urban center by the 9th century. The king of Janneh at this time would convert one of his palaces to a mosque. That mosque was rebuilt between 1906 and 7 and is now known as the Great Friday Mosque. There is a facade with 3 towers, as well as ostrich eggs that represent fertility and purity. The engaged columns you see here serve as buttresses, similar to what you would see on a Gothic cathedral. These are characteristics of West African mosque architecture. The Tehran's were projecting wooden beams that served as support like scaffolding, because every year the mosque had to be replastered to protect the core.
This is Neil McFarquhar in Janneh, Mali. This ancient city is famous for its mud mosque. The largest mud brick building in the world is a major tourist attraction, a giant sandcastle dominating the town's renowned market square. Everything in Janneh, from the post office to individual homes, is built with mud bricks. The town is a United Nations World Heritage Site.
This is a Janneh brick. It's a cylinder, and it's different from a normal brick.
But the heritage status has led to friction here. Homeowners resent the fact that under UN rules for heritage sites, they cannot modernize. Any remodeling, even inside their homes, must stick to the original design.
It pleases the population because the town is well known. But the owners of the houses should be able to make small changes to the interior of their houses. But the facades would stay the same.
All the buildings, and particularly the mosque, require constant upkeep. As you can see, on the upper part of the mosque courtyard walls, the plaster has washed away after just 3 or 4 rainstorms.
All around the brick, you can see the marks of hands. We do it all by hand, which means that every man who does it leaves a part of himself in the brick.
But the traditional restoration methods take money. The restoration of the Great Mosque alone is a $900,000 project funded by the Aga Khan Foundation. There is no such bounty for homeowners, and while they take pride in the tradition of these homes, they feel like they are just pieces in a museum designed to entertain tourists.
There's a sort of tension, difficulty that has to be resolved by not locking in people with the so-called traditional and authentic architecture. We have to try to find ways to evolve this architecture to bring it back to the necessities of life for the community. And do it in such a way that doesn't compromise the quality of the mud brick architecture, which is at the heart of the identity of the town of Janneh.
The town has failed to modernize in other essential ways. Janneh is drowning in garbage, open sewers run through the streets, and a rotting smell hangs over the town. Add into the mix climate change, which has lowered the river waters and lessened the quality of the mud, which in turn weakens the bricks and the buildings. The Malian government and foreign organizations are now turning their attention to Janneh's problems, trying to balance the frustration of the residents with history.
If you destroy the history that tourists come to visit, if you throw out 2,000 years of history, if you destroy all that, the city will lose its soul.
Let's now give a little attention to Africa and modernity. By 1914, all of Africa was under colonial rule and was broken up by region controlled by others. Since the 15th century, Europeans have collected artifacts of what they consider to be primitive cultures and reinforcing what they believe to be their own superiority. African art collections grew rapidly in Europe and the US. Anthropology is a branch of science within the social sciences that became more widely accepted, and it explains human development in evolutionary terms, as did Charles Darwin in the 19th century. African art has been embraced as art only recently, and it can be understood in this context. 1. Children. 2. Initiation. 3. The spirit world. 4. Divination. And 5. Death. Soon as African people came in contact with the colonial enterprises, they seemed to alter what is considered tradition from these cultures. Many people today still view African art as primarily ethnographic and not along the same line as Western art or painting in museums. Children are a form of social security because parents will need to be cared for when they got old. Infants have a poor life expectancy in Africa, dying before the age of 5, half of them. The life expectancy for everyone else was age 40. It was necessary to bear many children and hope for survival. Barren women were shamed in the community and offered prayers, offerings, and art was also produced to ensure they can produce offspring. The Yoruba people in Nigeria have the highest rates of twin births anywhere in Africa. They also produce a particular type of art for their infants. Because twins are more delicate, there is a higher mortality rate with twin births. There is a tradition that the parent must continue to care for the twin who has died. They can reach them with art and still help them and comfort them. The diviner will come to a woman who is grieving over one of the twins who has died and recommend an image of that twin be carved to serve as a dwelling place for the spirit, which will also be taken care of. The aesthetic preference for these sculptures is abstraction and not realistic representation. Once the sculptures are finished, the mother brings the artist gifts and dances home with the child. The sculptures are dressed and fed to appease the spirit and help the family survive.